Professor Ray here with another episode of Inventions That Change the World. And today we're going to talk about the spring. Springs come in many different shapes, sizes, and materials, but they're all designed to do basically the same thing. They store potential energy, which is static energy, and convert it to kinetic energy, which is energy of motion. So that's what a spring does, and it helps us in everyday life with some of the inventions that it's used in. They're used all around us, but they're often hidden from our view because they're built into pieces of equipment and into different devices. The first spring was probably the bow for shooting an arrow. When the string is pulled back, the bow stores potential energy. When it's released, it's converted to kinetic energy. And we can see this very clearly when we put an arrow in. So if I turn like this, pull the string back, we have stored potential energy, then release it. Sorry about that, Chief. So we've taken that arrow, stored the energy in the bow, released it, and converted it to kinetic energy to fire the arrow. Probably the first invention of the spring. In 1660, the British physicist John Hooke developed an equation that describes how the spring works. And his equation was force equals minus kx. And what X is the deformation of the spring, how it's pulled or compressed, the deformation. K is called the spring constant, and the minus sign comes into play because the deformation of the spring is in the opposite direction of the force that it creates. So the formula is F equals minus Kx. So some springs compress, some extend. There are actually 4 different kinds of springs. And the math can get a little different for some of the other types, but for compression and tension springs, the math F equals minus Kx applies. So what are the 4 types of springs? We have torsion springs, which are springs that convert to rotational type motion. We have compression springs. Those are springs that press in. We have tension springs that you pull apart, and we have leaf springs. So let's just give a quick example of each one. Torsion springs you can find in things like a clothespin and a mouse trap. It's stored energy, and now we just release that energy. You can also find them on things like garage doors for helping people open and close garage doors because the doors can be very heavy. The spring assists. Then we have what are called compression springs. This is a very small one, but where you're probably most familiar with is in a mattress. A mattress has bed springs, which are compression springs. You lay down, it compresses the spring. If you roll over, the ones start to extend again, and the others compress, and it kind of conforms the mattress to your body. We also have tension springs, and those are springs when pulled apart create tension. Here's an example with this piece of exercise equipment. If I pull it apart, I've deformed the springs in this direction, but I can feel the force pulling them together. The same is also true of this mini trampoline. If I hold it up, we can see some tension springs built into this, and that allows to bounce up and down on this mini tramp. We also have what are called leaf springs, and leaf springs are bars of thin steel put together, and they're built in a curve to form a special kind of spring that's used in cars, trucks, and on trailers. And what that does is help take the dampened vibrations when you're driving down the road. So if you hit bumps and everything, the springs tend to level it out and make a smoother ride. But here's some interesting trivia. In the early 1940s, there was a mechanical engineer named Richard James, and Richard James was aboard a ship, and he was trying to use springs in order to balance some sensitive equipment on the ship. He didn't want the rocking of the ship to damage the equipment, and he tried some different springs. And he was working on one, and it fell out of his hand and hit a stack of books and began walking down the books. he thought this was pretty novel, and he kind of demonstrated this to some people, and they thought that it had potential to be an interesting toy. So he borrowed $500, he built 400 of them, and he demonstrated it to kids. And while they were interested, they were fascinated with how this spring could walk, he didn't sell a single one. So he went to Gimbel's department store in Philadelphia, set up an inclined plane, which is a ramp, and he put the spring on it and started it walking. People gathered around, they saw what he was doing, they were amused by it, and he sold all 400 within 90 minutes, and that was the invention of the Slinky. All came from springs. So there we have it. We have 4 different kinds of springs. We have the torsion springs, we have compression springs, we have tension springs, and we have leaf springs. And we use them every day. They're often hidden in different devices. We don't see them. We take them for granted, but they really do help our lives. The spring was indeed an invention that changed the world. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. I appreciate everyone who has done that. And check out our website, www.steamporium.tech. That's steamporium.tech. Until next time, full steam ahead.